In this video, we're going to continue working with the AutoCAD drawing aids and some other settings too to help control our drawing environment and help us to draw accurately in AutoCAD. So in the last video, we went down here to the grid display, and we right-clicked on that and went into grid settings and took a look at that, and we made some changes to the grid spacing. But take a look at another option down here, which is grid behavior. And one of them is display grid beyond limits, and that's turned on. I'm going to turn that off right now and go OK. And now we're back to our screen, and look what's happened. Our screen that was filled with a grid display has shrunk down quite a bit and is quite a bit smaller. So what's controlling that? In that switch that we turned off, has said to display the grid beyond limits, and here, because we turned that off, it is not displaying the grid beyond the limits. It's contained by the limits. So how do we control limits? Well, that's simply done by the limits command, or the limits system variable. So if I type in limits and hit enter on the command line here, I get a prompt on the command line, and it says limits specify lower left corner or on off, and the on off are in our options brackets, and then in our default brackets, the angle brackets which show the default, it says the lower left corner is 0, 0. So I can accept that just by hitting the enter key, and then it says specify the limits upper right corner. And by default, again, in those angle brackets, it's 12, 9, so 12 inches by 9 inches. So it's a pretty small drawing area or drawing limits set here. So I can change that to something else. Let's say if I put in 24, 18 for a 24 by 18 inch area, and I hit enter. And now you'll see what happened on our screen is that our grid changes its size, because now it is being confined to a larger defined limits, 24 by 18 as opposed to 12 by 9. So that's one way we can control our drawing area. The other thing to note is if we go back into that limits command, is that the options were on or off. And all that means is that if the limits are on, then we can't draw beyond the limits. So if I could either type in the word on here, or one of the other options in AutoCAD on the command line is anything on the command line that is highlighted blue essentially is a link. So I could go down and just click on the word on in the options here, and you'll see that sets the limits on. So what that means is if I try and draw a line, I type in L, I hit enter, I click somewhere in my limits, and then I try and go beyond the limits and click, it won't let me place the line. And notice on the command line it says outside the limits. So that's what it means when limits are on. It will not allow you to draw beyond that area. And that's really just something that you could set for yourself to control how your drawing is progressing or how it is that you want to define your drawing. You can always draw beyond limits. I mean, AutoCAD doesn't care. This is really a setting for you that you would set to control what's going on in your particular design. So I'm going to escape out of that line command. And the other thing that I want to do here is notice that I'm kind of shrunk down, that my limits are have a small drawing area in the middle of the screen. Now I can zoom by rolling my mouse wheel in or out to that, but it's kind of hard to control exactly how I'm seeing that. So there's a zoom command that helps to zoom out to the defined limits. And the way to get to that is to enter zoom, so type in Z, enter, and then one of the options there on the command line is all. So again, I could type in the letter A, or I can go down here to click on the A, and then what happens is when you do zoom all, it zooms you out to the defined limits of your drawing. So that's what it's done here. So essentially it has filled the screen with my defined limits of 24 by 18 inches. And while we're talking about that, about inches versus anything else, because we installed AutoCAD here in the US, it installs by default in imperial units. So the default unit is inches. So down here on the coordinates display, all of these numbers, 18 point something or what have you, those are all inches, and then the point obviously is a fraction of an inch. It's being shown in decimal format. So that's what's happening here. Let's take a look a little deeper into the units, and the way we can do that is by activating another system variable, and that is the units system variable. So if I type in units on our command line, hit enter, the units drawing units dialog pops up, and right now it's telling us pretty much everything we know in terms of what we've been seeing. That right now our length is decimal, and that our precision is up to 4 decimal places, and that something here called insertion scale it shows us inches. If we open that up, you see there's many other different types of units which we could set. However, I would always leave that to inches because that's the default unit, and I would not go changing it simply because you would have a lot of difficulty working with other AutoCAD users or other drawings if you changed that default. So I would leave that alone. The thing we could change here, for instance, is the precision. If we look down at our coordinate display, we see that everything is in fact got 4 zeros after the decimal point. And if I change that up here, say to 2 zeros, and go OK, that now changes down here too. So now we're showing things in just 2 decimal places after the full unit, after the full inch. Let's go back into the inches dialog. I could do that simply by hitting enter. That's typical in AutoCAD. If you exit a command and you want to go back into it, if you just hit the enter key, it starts the last command that you just exited. And I just wanted to point out here that on the precision, AutoCAD goes down pretty precise, down to 8 decimal units here. Also, over on the right side, notice that they talk about angle and decimal degrees, and notice that there's a box here for clockwise. If you remember when we were looking at our polar coordinates display in model space, how that's set up, we talked about positive rotation being counterclockwise. You could override that here by setting this to clockwise. Again, I would not advise doing it. This is a fairly new setting that they've made available in AutoCAD, in the more recent versions of AutoCAD. And there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of AutoCAD drawings out there where the positive rotation was counterclockwise. And that's what most AutoCAD users are used to. So if you go changing this, you could cause some issues if you had to work with other CAD drafters, other AutoCAD drafters. Just quickly before we leave this again, about the precision, even though we set this down to 2 decimal places, that's really just a display. AutoCAD is always very accurate, and it's just these decimal places are just limiting how AutoCAD is showing us the dimension. But if I put in that I was drawing a line down to 4 decimal places, AutoCAD would draw it to that actual dimension. So AutoCAD is always accurate. These settings here are really just how AutoCAD is going to display that information to us. So I'm going to leave this for now just at the 2 decimal places, just for keeping it simple for us, and I'm going to go OK. Let's do some more drawing here now, and before we do, let's make a couple of changes to our settings down here on the status bar with our drawing aids. I'm going to shut off the snap to grid, or the snap mode, so that I am once again kind of able to go in any distance in any direction that I want and not confined to the increment down there. And this time I'm going to go up to, instead of typing the command in, I will go to the ribbon and click on the line command. And just like we had typed it in before, down on the command line, the command pops up. So no matter how you put commands in, even if you go through the ribbon or other ways, which we'll get into a little later, it always pops up on the command line. So the command line is really something you got to get used to looking at, because that's where AutoCAD is going to talk to you and you can talk to it. So let's just say I'm going to click just somewhere here, anywhere, and again I'm kind of free flying. I'm going to go off. I'm going to go beyond my my limits here and click. And I can't put my line out there. It's telling me down here that I'm outside the limits. So what do I have to do to be able to put my line out there if I need to? Because maybe my design in fact is bigger than these limits. Well, I can, in the middle of this command, reset my limits. And the way I do that to activate a command inside an AutoCAD command is to use the apostrophe. So right now, if I type in an apostrophe and then the word limits, or the system variable limits, and hit enter, you'll see that AutoCAD starts the limits command inside the line command. So it doesn't cancel me out of the line command. I'm still in the line command, but it enables me to make some changes to the limit setting. So I'm going to turn my limits off because I want to be able to draw beyond the defined limits. I'm going to click there, and then I'm put back into the line command. And now I can go over here and click anywhere I want, outside the limits or back inside the limits. So by turning those limits off, I have the entire model space available to me. So I'm just going to escape out of that, and I want to do undo because I really don't want that design there. And we're going to go and put another control on that enables us to draw accurately. The control we're going to use is called polar tracking. So let's see how that works. Let's start another line. So I'm going to go up here, click on the line command up in the ribbon, asking me for a point. I'm going to put in an absolute coordinate. So I'll type in 3, 3.25. Try a little fraction in here and hit enter. And so that's where our line starts. Now let's say I wanted to draw something that wasn't necessarily, perfectly horizontal, like at 0 degrees. Well, polar tracking will help us do that. I'm going to go over here to my drawing aids down by the status bar and click on this little symbol. It's a circle with a little angle cut out of it there. And you'll see that it's polar tracking, and that next to the word it has F10, which means this is also controlled by the F10 function key on your keyboard. But I'm just going to turn it on. And then when I come back to my screen here, I see what happens is that as I move my cursor, it kind of softly snaps into certain angles. So it snaps into 0. It snaps up here into 45. Right there. Continue, snaps at 90, 135, and then down to 180 in the negative X direction. So it's appearing to snap at 45-degree angles, but let's say I wanted to do something other than that, something different than 45 degrees. Well, if I go back down here to the drawing aid, I see the little pull arrow, and I click on that, you'll see that there's several different angles which I could set it to. So let's go and set it to the 15-degree setting. And again, if I go back to my screen, I see that we're at 0. And as I move up, it'll kind of soft snap or soft lock into 15 degrees, continue farther, go into 30, and on up. All right, so let's say I want to do something at 15 degrees. So I'll come up here until it hits that 15-degree angle, and the green guideline will appear. So as long as I pull along that green guideline, I can draw a line at any distance at that 15-degree angle. So I'm going to put in, let's say, 15 here. Hit enter. Oops, it didn't work. I typed in the wrong thing. I didn't type in 15. I typed in 5. So I'm going to do undo, and it puts me back to start again. So that happens sometimes. You have little errors. So again, wait till my cursor locks into the guideline at 15 degrees. I'm going to pull along the guideline, make sure the guideline is there, and type in 1.5 and hit enter. Okay, so now I've got my line 15 units long at 15 degrees. So let's say I wanted to complete drawing a rectangle at that angle at the 15 degrees off the horizontal. Now I can go up here, and it's telling me that I'm at 105 degrees. But what does that mean? Does that mean am I 90 degrees to my first line? Well, I could do the math and figure it out that maybe 105 degrees is 90 degrees off a 15-degree angle. Or I can go down here and make it simple for me and let AutoCAD do the work. Right-click on this and go to the tracking settings. And the tracking settings dialog opens up, and we see that we're on the polar tracking tab. There are several other tabs across here which we're going to end up be getting into. We were at snap and grid before, but now we're at polar tracking. Tells us that polar tracking is turned on. Yes, I know, I turned it on. Tells us our increment angle is 15. We set that earlier. Let's come over here to the right side and track orthogonally only. Well, that seems to be working okay. But down below that it says polar tracking measurement. And right now it's set to absolute. So that 105 that we saw on the angle is absolute to the model space environment. If I go down here and turn on relative to last segment, that's going to give me a big help here. So I'm going to turn that on and go OK. And now come back to my drawing. And you'll see that instead of being at 105 degrees, I'm at 90 degrees. And what that means is I'm 90 degrees to the last line that I drew. So even though that line is 15 degrees off the horizontal, off perfectly flat, AutoCAD is telling me that I can draw a line that is 90 degrees to it to make a perfectly square corner. So as I'm coming up that line, that guideline, make sure that you're on that guideline. And let's type in a distance. I'm going to say type in 9, hit enter. So now I have a line that is 9 units along. And again, it's telling me that I'm drawing, when the snap comes in, the polar snap tracking comes in, that I am at 90 degrees to that last segment. So I can come down this distance along this guideline here and type in my distance, which I believe was 15 for the bottom there, and hit enter. And then finally, just like we did before, I could put in the number like we did on that side for 8, or just as we've done before, just use the close option on the line command to finish this object. So I could type in C, or I can go down here and click on the C on the command line. And there are drawing finishes, and we have a nice perfect rectangle rotated 15 degrees off the horizontal. Okay, so we saw how polar tracking can help us there. But we're using, a very kind of standard increments, like 15 degrees in our case. What happens if we need to draw something at a very odd angle that the polar tracking doesn't necessarily help us with? Well, polar tracking could help us with that. It looks like my screen shrunk down here a little bit. I'm going to click that to bring it back. Polar tracking could help us with that. If I go down back there to the polar tracking and right click and go to the track settings, over here on the left side of this polar tracking, and it says increment angle is 15, we could add additional angles. And I could do that simply by turning this on. And then I could click new and fill in whatever angle I needed, whatever it was, 10.5, 8.7, 23.23, whatever I needed. So you could add other angles in here that you knew you were going to be needing in the course of your drawing. But that, if you have a design that is always at some odd angle, you could add that here. But yeah, obviously it could be difficult to keep track of and add all the possible angles that you could need. So I'm going to cancel out of this. But there's another drawing aid that comes into play here, and we can use this in addition to the polar tracking to do something at a different or unusual angle. And that is something called dynamic input. So dynamic input, down here on our drawing aids, it's a little symbol with a little rectangular box with a plus sign up next to it. I'm going to click that on. And let's see what that does. So if I go back up to my ribbon here and click on the line command, look what's happened on our screen. Down on our command line, the line command still pops up, still asking for specify first point. But that information is also now right next to my cursor. So it's saying there's my cursor, and there's like a prompt there, specify first point, and it's giving me a dynamic readout of where my cursor is. So as I move my cursor around a little bit, you'll see the numbers changing. The first box that's white with highlighted blue, that's the active box, that's X. And then the other box, which is gray right now, is the Y coordinate. So let's say I want to put it an absolute coordinate like I did before. And right now, with my dynamic input, like I said, the one that's highlighted blue is the active one. So I'm going to put in 4, and that appears in the X coordinate, or the first box. And now, in order to access the Y coordinate, or the second box, I need to hit the Tab key. So by hitting the Tab key, That locks the first coordinate in place, so we see 4 with a little lock next to it. And now it's asking me for input on the y coordinate. So I'm going to put in, say, 5.5 and hit enter. Okay, so there my line starts at those coordinates. Now look what's happening. As I drag this, a couple things are in play here. The polar coordinate is still turned on. We see that down here on our guide. That's still turned on, our polar tracking. And that is still locking in at the 15 degrees, or the 0 degrees. But also my dynamic input is allowing me to work with almost any angle that I want. So now instead of an x and y coordinate that we saw when we first started our line, we see a distance being shown, being displayed there. And as I move my cursor, you'll see that changes dynamically. Again, that's the white box with the highlighted in blue. And then the angle, which changes dynamically as I move my line around. All right, so let's say I know I want a line of a certain distance. Let's say it's 13. I type that in on my distance, and then again hit the tab key. And now I can either use the lock of the polar tracking, or dynamic input is allowing me to put in almost any number I wanted. So let's say I put in 9.5 and hit enter. Now I've got a line that's 9.5 degrees off the horizontal. And if I want to continue drawing a rectangle that has right angle corners to my first line, here my polar tracking is helping me, because it is saying that I am drawing a line that is 90 degrees relative to the first segment that I did, and I can pull up along that distance. Also notice that the dynamic input is showing me the absolute angle that I'm drawing over on the right side there. So here I can just type in a distance. Let's say I'm going to put in, let's say 10. And then down again, I am 90 degrees to my last segment, my last line segment. Now I just need to put in the distance I have here. So again, just make sure you're locked into the 90 degrees to the last line segment. And my distance here, I believe, was 13. Enter. And then again, we could bring this down with the distance that we knew from before, or we have the option to use the close command down there on the command line, or just type in C and hit enter. And there we have another rectangle with nice square corners, rotated at whatever that was, 9.5 degrees, I believe, was the angle we chose. Now, dynamic input is very useful, and we saw how it could help us draw something here at an odd angle. But you don't have to use that, and in fact, the dynamic input setting is something relatively new in AutoCAD. It's only been around for the past couple of releases. And if you don't have that, then how could you draw that? Well, you could draw that using something called relative coordinate input on the command line. So if I go down here and I turn off dynamic input by clicking on the little icon down in here in the status bar with the drawing aids, then start the line command up here on the ribbon, click the line command, line specify first point. I'll put in 3,3, enter. And I still have the polar tracking on, so I am locked into the horizontal or the 15-degree increments. But I want to do something that's outside of those, which the dynamic input helped us do. So the way I can do that is by putting in a series of codes on the command line. And this is a way of putting in something called relative coordinate input. So down here on the command line, I'm going to put in the @ symbol. And then I'm going to put in a distance, say of 20, and then a less than symbol, and I'm going to put in -12 and hit enter. And that sends us down actually off the limits and off of our screen area. So I'm going to do a rotate, do the scroll out and zoom out of my screen a little bit. And because the polar tracking is still on, I still have information that tells me that I'm 90 degrees relative to that last line segment, no matter what that was, in this case -12. But here I can just go up at that 90 degrees some distance, say 12 units, and then continue from there just like we had done before. So come back up this way 20 units or 20 inches, and then C to close. So here I was able to draw something at an odd angle, say -12 degrees, and not use the dynamic input. And frankly, I don't like the dynamic input and don't use it all that often. As I said, it's only been around for the past couple of releases of AutoCAD. AutoCAD itself has been around for over 30 years. I'm an old user. I've been using it for probably over 20 years. So I spent a long time without dynamic input. But these are tools. So these are tools for you to use to draw. So if you find them useful, certainly use them. If you are comfortable using the command line, as I was just in this example I just showed you here, then certainly go ahead and do that too. They're just here as tools for you to use. There's no absolute right way or wrong way to get the drawing done, as long as the drawing is accurate and complete. Okay, there's one last drawing aid that I want to talk about during this week's classes and videos, and that's something called Object Snap. Now earlier we talked about Snap Mode. This is different. Object Snap works only with the graphics that already are drawn on the screen. Snap Mode sets snap increments based on the grid, and can work whether or not there are actually objects drawn on the screen or not. Object Snap only works based on the geometry that exists. So it uses different points on geometry drawn on the screen to help us draw accurately. So before I demonstrate that, let's do a little work cleaning up our view here. So we have some kind of odd things going on with part of our drawing outside of our limits. But again, that's okay. You can draw anywhere you want, and AutoCAD will certainly support that. So the thing I want to do first is I'm going to do a zoom all. So type in Z, enter A for all. And we see that the screen zooms in. It goes to the top of our limits here, but because we have an object outside the limit, it also includes that. So it zooms down and includes that lower point that's below our defined limits. Okay, so how do object snaps work? It's down here on the drawing aids, down here on the status bar. It's an icon that shows a little square with a little star in one corner. And again, that it says Object Snap, also called OSnap, and that can be controlled by a function key, the F3 key. So I'm going to click that and turn it on. And Object Snap has many kind of sub-settings that are associated with it. So to see them, click on the little arrow that's right next to the icon. And we see a list of the various kinds of object snap locations that the aid will work with. Right now, it will snap to endpoints, center points, intersection, and something called an extension. There's probably a couple more that we could use here in the course of working on our drawing. So I'm going to turn midpoint on, and I'm going to turn perpendicular on. So I have, let's see, 6 different object snaps turned on. There are some others that are useful, but we won't need them right now. But you can come back at any time and turn them on or off as you need them. So once those are on, and if you don't see anything happening right now as I kind of move my cursor over my geometry, my line work that's on the screen. But if I start a command, if I start the line command and hit enter and click a point anywhere, I'm not going to even use an absolute start point, just pick any kind of point and then start drawing. And as I'm moving, now we're seeing the guideline that's coming on because of the polar tracking. But as I pass over these various objects and these various points on these objects, you'll see these little green icons pop up. So for instance, if I come over here, you'll see a little triangle, green triangle appear. And if I hold my cursor there a minute, it tells me that I found the midpoint of that line. If I come up here and hold it there for a second, it tells me I found the end point. If I come up here, a bunch of stuff going on here, and if I hold it there long enough, it'll tell me that I found an intersection. And also if I come over here, it'll tell me that I have found a point that is perpendicular to the original point that I started from. So you'll see that it's finding different kinds of geometry as I move around. So this helps me to draw accurately. If in fact I wanted to draw a line, say down here, and hit this side of this rectangle perpendicular, I wait until the little symbol appears and then click, and I have drawn a line that is now perpendicular or 90 degrees to that line that existed. So it would be very difficult to do that, to draw it accurately, if I didn't have these guides, these object snaps working for me. So I can continue with that. I can come up here, click on an endpoint, and I know that I have attached to it. I can come up here where there's a collection of lines, and this may be a case where you might want to zoom in so you see what's going on, because if you don't zoom in, you can't really draw accurately there. So I'm going to right click, hit the zoom, and then right click again and use zoom window, and I'm going to draw a little window around this area and zoom in. And then hit exit, and I'm back to my line command, and we see there's a lot of stuff happening right here. So for instance, we have an intersection there, another intersection up there. There's also a midpoint happening here, so a lot of geometry happening at this location, which you could only see if you zoomed in to look at it. And that's sometimes what you have to do, that the only way you can know exactly what's going on is if in fact you do zoom in, because AutoCAD is so accurate and can have so much information in any one area that it's, you can come up here and you might be seeing an intersection snap, but it's unclear as to what intersection it is that you're snapping to. So you may have to zoom in to take a look at that. Let's say for this case here, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to actually not go to an intersection, but go to the midpoint of this line. And go and bring up the zoom again and go to zoom extents, so it takes us back out so we can see, and then exit, and then I'm still drawing. So this is what the object snaps can do for you. You can use this to connect to geometry in an accurate way and make sure that you're connecting to the point that you want to, that you need to or want to connect to. So for instance, if I wanted to complete this object, I could come down here, and even though I could probably use the close option to complete this object, I can also come down here and snap to the end point of that line. And in that way I know that I've gotten to that exact location, and I can click and then hit enter and finish my drawing command and have drawn this kind of oddly shaped object based on the geometry that was already on the screen. Okay, so that's kind of ends up our little summary of the various drawing aids that are available to us. And we'll use them now in our next video to start working on one of the homework assignments. Okay, see you then.